So the basic concept is we've read a lot of fantasy novels. We know that there is some hunger for additional fantasy novels out there, be they audiobooks or physical books. And so we thought we'd share some of our favorites that are off the beaten track so that maybe some of you all out there can experience the same love we have. Thank you, Brecken. So who wants to start?
We were talking to Lauren yesterday, and she was talking about some of the frustrations she had found with the fantasy genre recently, which I thought was a pretty good way to sort of kick the discussion off.
Yeah, I think that's great.
Yeah, go for it, Lauren.
Yeah.
No, sci-fi and fantasy has been a super long favorite genre of mine. I read a lot of sci-fi, fantasy, and romance now, but sci-fi fantasy, I was one of those nerdy little kids that would go to the school library and check out anything with dragons, anything. And I think towards the end of college, I found myself getting a little frustrated with fantasy as a genre. It felt a little stale, and sci-fi still felt current and felt like there was a lot of good social commentary, technology, grappling with big topics, and fantasy was falling flat a bit. And I think a year ago, maybe a bit more, I was gonna give it another try. I really love fantasy, and so I went out and purposely sought authors, female authors, queer authors, authors of color. So I got sort of this influx of different stories that are are a little bit different than just farm boy has magic powers and goes on a journey and saves the world. And so I found there's so much good stuff out there now being written. You just gotta look for it. That's my fantasy take.
It is kind of amazing that fantasy started out with people like Tolkien bringing in elves and dwarves and hobbits and things like that. And then, fairy tales back in the day. And nowadays, everybody who grew up reading that stuff has been really inspired. And so there's a ton of writers now that are putting their own twist on things. I think, honestly, the number of avenues that you've got for finding really good books these days, it seems like you could very easily get lost on a treasure hunt.
That's my problem. I have the same problem choosing new books that I do that my aunt has trying to watch something on Netflix. It's there's just too much. I don't know what to choose. Yeah, I don't know what to invest my time in. So I tend to rely a lot on recommendations and things like that before I'll put my foot in something, because I know otherwise I'll just be mad at myself for wasting time if I just pick something random and don't enjoy it.
Yeah, I think it's books are one of the things friends' recommendations are still gold, right? TV shows and books. If I have a friend that's here's the pitch, this book's really good, I just read it, that's normally what's gonna really do it.
I actually got a recommendation sort of through Facebook yesterday. Somebody took a picture of a page of a book, one of my Facebook friends, and I was able to just read the paragraph that was snapshotted there, and it was enough to make me be I'm going to read this book. And I found it online and was able to get it, and I read it in a day.
Oh my gosh.
It was urban, I literally finished it half an hour ago, and it was urban fantasy, which can kind of shake some of that stuff that you were talking about, Lauren, which is a genre that I've stuck a toe in every once in a while, but I haven't gotten to read so much recently.
What book was it?
Discount Apocalypse.
Hmm.
It's
I
pretty good. There's little fucking kids. And they're very just, and they make a festival out of everything. And it's great. And that has nothing to do with what the actual plot is. That's literally just like a little side thing that happens.
I love urban fantasy. Super fun.
It was really, really good. I enjoyed it, and it's the whole series. So
I always think of the Dresden Files. Like when I think of urban fantasy, that's like quintessential urban fantasy to me.
I have so many friends who have read that, but I haven't.
Yeah, I also have a friend who's like really super big into Dresden Files, and I know like in like RPG communities, there's like the Fate system has a very popular Dresden Files setting, and every time you read something about the Fate system, they're talking about Dresden Files. So like many times I've been like, I should probably check that out, but I just never have.
I've read a couple of books, but it's been long enough ago that I couldn't tell you which ones I read. I think I read the first one, and then I read something that was well into the middle of the plot because I was fairly lost for a good portion of it.
Yeah, there's like 11 books at least. So many.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot. Well, and I think the problem is I just grabbed 2 books off the shelf at the library. I didn't bother looking at what the order was. And that was a mistake. Don't make that mistake.
You have to get like super into the lore, and then like things build, and then they're talking about some like magic sword from like 3 books ago. Yeah.
Yeah. And the characters, they're assuming that you know all the characters already. And so they do like a quick, brief, like refresher on who that character is. And then they're off and running. It's like, wait, hold on, wait. So long.
Yeah, I've had all of the Dresden File books downloaded because I do a lot of like digital reading, and I have just never started them. I suppose I should start.
I mean, they're
To keep a list of like, in order to catch up, you've gotta hit at least one from these lists.
Apparently, there are 15 Dresden books out.
I'm way behind the times.
Yeah. Your outdated Dresden knowledge.
Oh no.
Yeah. What about you, Josh?
Wait, what do you mean? What about me?
Like, talk about some stuff that you like.
So my favorite high fantasy author is Terry Pratchett.
Mm-hmm.
The Discworld series is phenomenal.
Excellent.
Mm-hmm.
But I felt like I didn't pick Terry Pratchett for my go-to book for a recommendation today because I felt like a lot of people who have explored the high fantasy novel area for any period of time have probably at least heard of Terry Pratchett, and I've probably had about 4 different Discworld novels recommended to them as the place to start. So I was like, I don't need to recommend that because probably a ton of other people already have. Terry Pratchett is very, what's the word I'm looking for?
Prolific?
Prolific. That's exactly the word I was looking for. Very prolific writer. He got a lot of books done before his passing, I think just 2 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
very recently. So definitely check his stuff out. But the book that I came today with the intent of recommending is Another Fine Myth by Robert Asprin. And this is, I think, mid-70s, early 80s that this book was published. It's a series that not a ton of people have heard of, but the base concept is that it is a wizard's apprentice whose master is kind of a drunken layabout who passes away, or actually I can't, it's so long since I read it, I actually can't remember right now.
Just vamp.
Something happens to the master, and the apprentice ends up summoning this demon kind of by accident. The demon is named Oz and is from the dimension Perv, which makes him a pervert. But essentially, it's this whole plot concept about high fantasy adventurers may not be as bold and daring as you assume them to be just because the story says so. Maybe they just got caught up in something accidentally and stumbled their way through and came out smelling like roses. And I've always been a big fan of that because it really humanizes the main characters as they're like, what are we doing? What's going on? Oh, how did this happen?
That sounds really cool, and that makes that like comedic kind of take on fantasy sounds like if you like Harry Pratchett, you
Oh, yeah.
probably dig
Yeah.
that.
Just talking about the comedic take on fantasy, this is something that I read a few books of maybe like 20 years ago. Is anybody familiar with, I think it was called A Wizard in Rhyme? Does anybody know what I'm talking about?
I've definitely heard of that. I don't think I've read it.
Yeah, the premise is this graduate student in English literature, I think his name is Matthew Mantrell or something, but he gets like sucked into this like alternate universe fantasy world. And it's basically like generic fantasy setting one. And he gets there and he finds out, because like I think, if I remember right, at the beginning of the book, he was just sort of lamenting like, what am I going to do with a master's degree in literature? Like, how am I going to find a job? And so he lands in this fantasy world and he discovers that like reciting like poems and like sonnets and soliloquies and things like that has magical powers. So like stuff will happen and he'll just have to stop and think and go through like his mental list of Shakespearean sonnets to find one that's appropriate. And he's just kind of like, I think this will probably do something that will help me out in this situation. It depends on how it's interpreted, I guess. And then he does it, and sometimes something good happens, sometimes something bad happens. And he also spends a lot of time trying to like modernize the kingdom. Like he sets up like a university system, I think. And the princess or the queen is like, oh, what will they be learning there? He's like, actually, it's not to learn anything. It's just so they can get more experience being on their own, so they can learn to be adults, basically. But they probably won't learn anything outside of that. But I liked it because it very, very much did not take itself seriously, and it was just like very much like, this is really dumb, but I'm doing it anyway. Mm-hmm. What about you, Phil?
I have a couple that I generally recommend. One's kind of similar to what Josh said, is the Old Kingdom trilogy by Garth Nix, who, while generally a young adult author, the Old Kingdom trilogy is leaning more towards getting out of that genre, but has a weird take on the fantasy setting. It's as if there are two worlds that just kind of pretend the other doesn't exist. One where science is taken over and they have steam power and cars, electricity, all of that. And then another where that kind of stuff just doesn't work once you cross the border far enough, and where magic and the undead are a huge issue. But it's not one of the normal, this super powerful character just makes their way through and shows off their prowess. It's more of a, this kid is born to one of the great, basically necromancers. They're called Abhorsons in this series.
I love that series so much.
It's such a good series. And then she is taken back, learns about her heritage, and then he dies trying to prevent the new coming of these great elementals, essentially. And then it goes through the 3-book series where she has to find her way, understand the power, figure it out basically all on her own. And then you find out, she has a daughter and other kids, and it just goes through their entire life before they finally manage to save the world just by the skin of their teeth and a lot of luck. And it kind of turns a lot of the normal fantasy tricks on its head.
Yeah, that one is so good. I read it when I was in like middle school or early high school, and it's like, it doesn't feel like a young adult novel. It feels like pretty serious, and the like growing up that the leads do is really good. And I have a soft spot for necromancy. Like, I think
That needs to be a t-shirt. I have a soft spot for necromancy.
the book that I'm going to recommend also features necromancy. I just think it's a really cool, underappreciated magic system.
It really is. And I've actually used the Old Kingdom trilogy for a lot of inspiration for some adventures that I write for Goblins and Growlers, because it's unexpected. People are like, "Oh, one dead. You know, they're just attacking, and we're hearing this strange music in the background. I wonder what that has to do with it."
Are those bells?
Like, I got you.
That's super cool. I took a class in college, sci-fi and fantasy lit, so I'm cool. And that was one of the books that we read.
Really?
Sci-fi and fantasy lit class, yeah.
I also took
It's a really well-written series.
Yeah, I took a fantasy lit class in college, and I cannot recall anything that we read in that class, which is really sad. The teacher was adamantly against Lord of the Rings in that class. Kind of for like she was operating from the same premise we are, that it sucks all the air out of the room and you can't have a discussion about it because they're too passionate about it.
We didn't read Lord of the Rings, but we did, we gotta talk about it.
Yeah.
But I remember a very heated discussion about Star Wars and whether it was fantasy or sci-fi. And people were upset. Some was upset.
I mean, that's the trouble with trying to draw the line between sci-fi and fantasy sometimes, is that it can be both, y'all.
Yeah.
It can.
Well, yeah, there's another book series that I like. It's called, and every time I admit to it, I'm embarrassed, because it's the 1632 series by Eric Flint. Is anyone familiar? I know. Yeah.
Offhand.
I'm familiar enough with the first book.
Yeah. So this book series was introduced to me when I was at a Walden Books like 20 years ago with a friend of mine, and he's like, "Oh, you should totally read this." And I said, "Why?" He said, "It's about a bunch of West Virginia coal miners who get thrown back in time into the 1600s of Germany, and are in the middle of the 30 Years' War." So they end up like,
they were pitching this to me.
Yeah, I mean, it's really fun. It's like the Maury Povich of fiction books, because it's just garbage. It's just complete garbage, but it's so entertaining.
Garbage.
Yeah.
In several ways.
Yeah, but it's so entertaining.
A guilty pleasure?
It's very much a guilty pleasure.
It depends on what type of pleasure you're looking for.
Well, like I lately in my life have said there are no guilty pleasures. Yeah.
Before I gave up.
I read the whole book in a day. It's Eric Flint is an academic and absolutely not like a story writer, but he's managed to come up with a really good concept. And like there's like 20 different books in this series, and he farms out the writing to other people who are varying degrees of good or bad at it. But the whole thing just sort of follows, like, they land there, they end up having to like form their own city-state democracy in the middle of like disunited southern Germany, and they get in a fight with Cardinal Richelieu from France, and they completely change the course of history and everything. At some point later in the series, they go to the Caribbean to secure get a stranglehold on the sugar trade or something like that, so they can keep making money. They ally with the King of Norway and create the new United States of Europe.
I can sum it up with the last sentence from the synopsis. At that moment, freedom and justice, American style, are introduced to the middle of the 30 Years' War.
Whoa.
Yeah. I'm very self-aware of how embarrassed I should be for enjoying that book. But anyways, I was mentioning this because it does a really kind of interesting, it does sort of its own interesting straddle of the fantasy sci-fi line, because the method by which they're sent back in time is very much sci-fi, but then like they almost become the science fiction when they're existing in the 1600s, because the town there was like a coal-fired power plant there, and also like a natural gas system there. So they're able to like bring like power and lights and even television to the 1600s and stuff. And all these people from the 1600s are just like, because they're living in huts and hovels, like the person being oppressed in Monty Python and the Holy Grail. They're just like digging mud and everything. But it keeps the story grounded in the real in as much as you can for a story with this premise, but through the eyes of the people who traveled back like 400 years, it feels kind of like a fantasy novel that they're living in. But by God, they're going to turn it into modern America if they have to die trying.
Before we turn it over to either Sharon or Lauren, whichever of you would like the floor first, so Facey says that she has a guilty pleasure suggestion, which is Walt Becker's Link. It's basically what if aliens bred with ancient humans and Indiana Jonesy with a little sex aid. And that sounds delightful, but also like you know exactly what you're getting into.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kingdom of the Crystal Skull.
That sounds amazing. I love like when some like sexy romance gets into my like adventure fantasy sci-fi. So sounds hilarious.
On that note, I will recommend Discount Armageddon, Lauren. Delightful. It's a cryptozoologist in New York from a family cryptozoologist, and they have sort of like a centuries-old rivalry with another group that their mission is to eliminate all unnatural creatures. So like, Sasquatches and Wendigos and dragons and elves and all that. And her family defends them, but also studies them from like a science perspective. But she's also a dancer. But she's too busy like having to wait tables at like a strip club so that she can live in New York away from her crazy family. But she has a colony of mice that live in her apartment with her because it's like a break-off colony that like her family keeps these mice. It's this weird like little background chorus every time she does something. They like cheer her on. So good.
You can never make fun of me for liking 1632 ever again.
Yes, I can, because this is a message of acceptance. Any strange creature that might live in your city, they're just doing what they do. They don't necessarily want to harm humans. They're just there trying to live their lives, man. And the Price family send them.
I like it. Sort of a reverse supernatural type situation.
It's very that. It does have very supernatural vibes. Yeah.
Yeah, normally those like urban fantasy, like paranormal sort of romancy type things, the main character is like badass vampire hunter or like something like that. So it's nice that you get
She
that
is
trope
that
a little
too,
bit.
but her primary mode is defender.
Yeah.
And then like to let him off with a warning, be like, okay, please don't eat any more humans. And then she has to enforce. But only, on days when she can take time off from being a ballroom dancer.
That's wild. I love it.
Mm-hmm.
Lauren, did you want to talk about your recommendation now?
Sure. I brought a couple of books.
Just talk till you run out of oxygen. It's fine.
Okay. I'm going to talk about the one I'm reading right now. I'm totally obsessed. I sat on this one, Six of Crows. I sat on it for a while. I saw it was getting some good reviews, and I was like, I don't know. But it's actually really great. It's a heist, like a fantasy heist novel. The whole novel is a heist.
Okay.
So, the characters are like, sort of, the main character is sort of like a little bit of an Artemis Fowl type, like super smart, ruthless gang leader in the slums of this city. And he gets pitched by one of the merchants. It's like the job to end all jobs. And he has to break into like a foreign government's like stronghold and extract somebody. You know, like only you can do it because you're the best thief. And the book, he like assembles a crew, and like you get a bunch of different characters who are all there for their like own motivations and have their own backstories. And then right now, this far away from finishing, and they're like broken into the fortress, and they had to like go undercover, and then their plan went to shit, and then they're gonna have to like find another way out. Super fun, very like adventure-y and dark.
That sounds cool. I love a good heist story.
Right?
Yeah, it transcends genre. It's fantastic.
Yeah. So, it's like heist and locked door murder mysteries can be done in any genre, and they're gonna be amazing.
Unless the milieu has frequent use of teleportation spells. Then a locked door murder mystery becomes much more mysterious.
Maybe it could be done really well. I'm sure they have sci-fi locked door murder mysteries.
I'm sure they do. I can't think of one off the top of my head though.
The book I'm recommending for book club is sort of a locked door murder mystery. It's this one, Gideon the Ninth. It's got necromancers. It walks the line between sci-fi and fantasy. So it's just to read. I can't describe it better than like the little line on the bottom. Lesbian necromancers explore a haunted Gothic palace in space.
If that's not a great description, I don't know what is.
Yeah, that's
Right,
fantastic.
like, it's Gothic in both the like hot topic sense and the literary sense.
That's phenomenal.
And it's actually like really well written. It's up for the Hugo Award for Best Novel this year.
Oh wow.
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 And it's the author's like first novel. It's really good.
That's impressive.
It's got, so there's so much necromancy. There's like all these different houses have different like styles of necromancy, and it's really cool. And they're all stuck on this like deserted planet, like this deserted palace on this planet, and they have to figure out what happened because there's like this competition, and they have to all compete to see basically who can solve the puzzles and like figure out what happened and why the palace was all deserted and decrepit. And
So it's also a point and click adventure game.
it's so good. So that's my recommendation for book club.
Gideon the Ninth.
Yeah.
Sounds amazing. We had a couple more comments. Fisk Black had a guilty pleasure series, which is the Inheritance Cycle, saying, I know it's not the greatest series, but it brings me joy just for the premise being so good. Which
Is that the Christopher Paolini one?
Yeah, which, by the way, growing up a homeschooler and finding out that a 15-year-old homeschooler was a published author was like, yeah, homeschooling's pretty cool.
Yeah, where's your knowledge on Josh?
series, but I don't know what like the plot is.
The-
You go ahead.
Phil and I both are like, we're so ready to talk. It's the base concept is that it's a world where dragons are very rare, but they bond with people, and those people are then the only person that bonds with the dragon is then that dragon's rider. It's, as I understand it, sort of similar to Dragon Riders of Pern in that sense. I have not read a lot of Dragon Riders of Pern, so that I'm less familiar with. But it's a very YA novel. It's literally written by a YA. So it's if you're feeling a little bit of that, like, what was it like to be 15? This will very quickly take you back to those times. And that is both its strength and its weakness at the same time. Because if you're going into it expecting it to be something a little bit deeper and more fulfilling than a YA novel, you might be like, well, where's the rest of the substance? Like, where's the hidden messages that I was supposed to find when I came back at the age of 27? And you may not find those so much. But for really encompassing the young adult atmosphere, I think there's almost nothing better. I unfortunately fell off of that series at eldest because of things that were going on in my life at the time. I was like, I can't do the angst right now. It's too much. But Phil, I imagine you probably finished the series, given what I know about you and taking things all the way.
Yeah, I've read through Brzezinger's third book and then found out, oh, he's changing it from a trilogy to a 4-book cycle. Now I've got to get the fourth book and read this.
I've read the first two. Now I remember.
Yeah, Aragon, Eldest,
Yeah.
Brzezinger, and Inheritance. I actually have all 4 of them still because I can never bring myself to get rid of books. So Josh, if you ever want to finish it, I have it.
Oh, and it had a movie too. That was really bad.
Oh, the movie's horrible.
We don't talk about the movie in much the same fashion that we don't talk about the Avatar, The Last Airbender movie.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
They don't exist.
No.
They don't
Doesn't
exist.
exist.
I was so looking forward to the movie being good because it had Chris Irons in it, which should make a movie excellent, like just by itself. Then it was such a disappointment.
And if you had read the book, Christopher Paolini wrote it in such a way that turning it into a movie would be so easy. Like, you could literally just break the book out into a script and be like, here you go, and it'd be a great movie. But they didn't do that at all.
Sure. Breckett brings up a good point. The movie was impressive levels of bad.
You guys are ignoring Scribo7's comment about Gideon the Ninth.
Well, we were about to get there. We wanted to talk through Aragon first. Scribo7 says, I was about to say regarding Gideon the Ninth, I was about to say you had me at necromancers, but then lesbians, which I was in the same boat, so I totally get where Scrib's coming from.
I actually have another book recommendation featuring lesbians, so I could.
But are they necromancers?
No necromancers.
Oh, it's only half a loaf.
What are they necromancers?
Actually, I did finish a book over the weekend about lesbian necromancers. Another one.
Are you sure this isn't just a subgenre or subculture that I'm unaware of?
Are you writing these books?
This is like when I was in high school and I found out that time traveling romance novels were like their own thing.
What?
There was that movie with Hugh Jackman where he like traveled forward in time or whatever. I can't remember the name of it, but he was like some nobleman.
Kate and Leopold.
Yes, Kate and Leopold. And I remember remarking to a friend that was a really stupid premise, and she was just like there's tons of stories like that. Like, she showed me her mom's dime store novel collection of time traveling romances, and it was just like a giant shelf full of them. It was Outlander before it was cool.
Bookstore.
before we cut Lauren loose on talking about more lesbian necromancers, which I am very excited to get into, we've had a couple more comments. Someone recommended, it was Breckid recommended watching Aragon with the Rift Tracks commentary.
Ooh, I bet that would be fun.
Because that is a way that makes that film bearable, as I understand it. Scribo7 says that lesbian necromancers should be a subgenre. Bofacey shortened it down to lesbomancers. And then we're getting general good vibes for Rift Tracks, people being appreciative of the good work that Rift Tracks does. So Lauren, please tell us about this additional novel that has lesbian necromancers in it.
I literally just finished it a couple of days ago. This is it, The Unspoken Name. It's it's like Gideon the Ninth is not YA. It reads very much like an adventure novel, but like this one is actually YA, so pretty dark, like for YA. Basically, the sort of like the main character is an orc, and they don't call her that, but she's got like tusks, and she's like clearly an orc. And she's a raised in the cult of like necromancy god, and raised to be like a sacrifice, and so she's like the child bride essentially, and so she's going to like be sacrificed on her like 14th birthday, and then she runs away. But like once you owe a debt to like a god of death, like you eventually have to pay that up, and so there is lots of adventure and sort of as her, so she becomes like an assassin, and she winds up like betraying all of that and falls in love sort of, and but all the while like her past is very necromancer librarian tracking her down.
Sounds amazing.
She's not a necromancer, but there's lots of necromancy in it.
It's necromancy adjacent.
Yeah. The bad guys are necromancers. But yeah, super fun.
That's so cool. And I feel like I haven't read fantasy novels in far too long because you're coming out here with all of these amazing recommendations, and I'm like, man, I'm recommending stuff from like the mid 70s, and Lauren's here like, yeah, this one's Hugo Award nominated for this year, and this one also came out recently, and all of these sound amazing.
She has an Instagram to do book recommendations. Like she's got several legs up on us on this whole thing.
Yeah. But that's why we're doing this, so that everyone can get these good recommendations.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I vote we make Lauren the official host of this, because clearly she knows way more about what she's doing than the rest of us do.
Written
I
them all
second that.
down.
I just like to talk about books a lot, that's all.
I mean, I'm thrilled because
Sure, it's a relief to my friends who are like, oh, we're so tired.
feel like what's that you say? You've become part of a monthly Twitch for streaming, talking about fantasy books.
Get it all out of my system.
Expend that energy over there.
Release valve.
Scribo7 wants us to know that is Liz.
Mm-hmm.
Hello, Liz.
Liz is Scribo7. And then Bofacey says, there's a lot going on and I'm here for all of it. Which I'm right there with you on that one.
Mm-hmm.
It's got child bride to the god of death, and then necromancers. Also, she's an orc. Like, all of this is great. I'm excited.
Yeah.
So let's have a little brief discussion about which of these books we are thinking about reading this month,
Mm-hmm.
coming back and talking about next month. And chat, if you have any additional recommendations you'd like to put out here, now is a great time to do it.
Yes,
So-
Liz,
so-
we can definitely do that.
Yeah, we'll have a blog post, Liz. Don't worry about it.
So personally, I'm really excited about the Gideon the Ninth book that Lauren was talking about. 'Cause
Yeah.
It sounds
That's
amazing.
where I was leaning.
Yeah,
Yeah, I would definitely give that.
yeah,
Like I love all the books that came to the table today. Like all of those sound absolutely like things I need to read. But for things that I need to read immediately and then talk about, hopefully shortly thereafter, so that I'm not like bubbling over with excitement. I think Gideon the Ninth is right there for it.
yeah. I'm having a hard time coming up with an argument against it, really.
Yeah.
And I'm
How
fairly
long is it,
argumentative.
Lauren?
That's always something to consider. I think it clocked in around 420 pages.
That's not too bad.
I'm going to be bubbling over for a while then. I'll be able to read that in a couple of days.
Well, Phil, just read everybody else's recommendations first.
Yeah,
I'm definitely interested in reading a couple of these, and I might just do that.
oh, this is the first book in a trilogy, it says. Is it a planned trilogy?
It's planned. So
Okay.
the second book was supposed to come out soon, but I think it got pushed back to like October or something.
Oh, because of COVID?
Fair.
But
Oh, hey, and it's only $12 on Amazon. All right.
Is that for physical or digital copy?
It looks like it's for physical.
Neat. So I could probably get it cheaper digital.
Yeah.
Because
Oh.
I literally cannot fit any more books into my.
Oh, wait a minute. Hardcover is $15. It's $13 on Kindle.
Oh, that's not bad.
No.
$15 for a hardback is great these days.
That's a phenomenal
oh
price.
my god,
Yeah.
it adds up.
Yeah.
Trust me, I know.
Yeah, I have a rule for myself now. If it's like a book that I feel is capital I important or capital I interesting, I will buy a hardback. But if it's something like 1632, for example, I'm like, I'm not damaging the environment just so I can read this, and I just get it digitally.
For me, it's books I'm likely to loan. I'll always get hardcover
hmm
because I don't want to be the person who loans you a book already in tatters and then pages start falling out while you're reading it and you're like, ah.
I like paperback, like hard, because I read a lot on the metro on my like commute to work. Sometimes like hardcover books are a little bulky, but I like reading the physical books. For my Kindle, I normally do like the books that are harder to find in stores, like
Mhm. Oh, hey, speaking of
in my book choices.
Speaking of finding books in stores, I guess like I mentioned Amazon a second ago, but like support your local bookstores while all this stuff's going on. Like most of them are doing like curbside pickup and stuff like that. Spend 5 minutes calling around to some bookstores in your area to see if you can find the book.
Yeah, I think just here in Richmond, we've got it's a chain, but it's Second and Charles,
hmm
which does a lot of really good both used and new sales. So supporting them would be cool. We've had a couple of people who are regulars, the Goblins and Growlers, who work there. So we're always pro supporting them.
Yeah, and it's also a lot of smaller shops like Book People over near Willow Lawn.
Shop Suey and Carry Town.
Yeah,
Oh, Chop Suey for sure.
yeah,
That's such a cool bookstore.
yeah, it is.
I don't even live in Richmond, and I know that bookstore.
I'm old enough to remember when the primary Chop Suey was down Cary Street a ways. It's now a crappy mini mart. And the one in Carytown was Chop Suey Tui. And it was the smaller one.
Brecken would like us to know that Fountain Bookstore delivers as well.
There you
Oh,
go.
that's neat.
All right, yes. Support independent bookstores.
Absolutely.
Or at the very least, support chain bookstores that result in money going back into your local economy.
Yeah. Chain bookstores that are employing your friends and or family.
hmm
If anyone is in Nova, there's also McKay Brothers up there. And that's
Oh,
an
yeah.
excellent bookstore.
Up in Manassas, I think there is one.
Yeah, Manassas. It's their biggest location. They also have one in Tennessee and Kentucky.
Wow.
But they don't have one in Henrico anymore.
Not anymore, unfortunately.
My local favorite is Politics and Prose,
Ooh, where's that?
up in DC.
I've actually been there when I went up and visited DC. I got a couple books from them.
Yeah, they're like the DC bookstore. Kramer books too. They're pretty good.
Yeah, the big local bookstore back in my hometown just launched, I think, like a GoFundMe, just because they rely so much on foot traffic from people on weekday evenings and Saturday afternoons and Saturday nights and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And you don't open an independent bookstore to make money. You do it because you love books, and most people are just breaking even on these things. So again, I feel bad for even mentioning Amazon earlier. Please support your local bookstores.
How could you, Brandon?
Well, I wasn't thinking. Does anybody have any really stupid, you probably shouldn't read this, but you'll enjoy it maybe in a way if you do, kind of recommendations? Not like a serious let's read this for next month kind of thing, but just like this is dumb.
People have some strong guilty pleasure book suggestions.
Yeah.
Last topic.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of some good some of my guilty pleasure books, and I think I like paranormal romance adventure stuff, and the Anita Blake series by Laurel K. Hamilton is the epitome of guilty pleasure. That would be my embarrassing book that features a necromancer too. Main character is necromancer. I swear to God, it's not planned. But there's
You definitely have a type.
I like goths. I don't know. But there's I see vampires and werewolves and lots of murder. And very fun.
I don't have a guilty pleasure to recommend, but I have a comfort read that I've been rereading.
That's another good one.
To read Discount Armageddon, but I'm rereading Once and Future King, which is really awesome if you've never read it. I mean, it's an Arthurian legend retelling, but it's really, really good. It's got a good whimsical air to it, but it's also kind of it's a little dark and a little little human in a lot of places. It's really good.
Go ahead, Phil.
Sorry. Not really a guilty pleasure, but more of a easier read that I finished up recently for the third time. Is Magicians by Lev Grossman. It's basically adult Harry Potter. And I mean, I'm pretty sure most people read Harry Potter when they were younger, and it's a fairly well-written series. If you want more of a grown-up version, this is basically it.
Have you seen the TV show?
I have not had a chance to yet, no.
I've seen at least the first season, maybe the first 2 seasons of the TV show, and it's pretty fun. So I'm curious how.
Do they stream somewhere? Where do they stream? Or is it just on TV?
I thought it was on Hulu.
I can't remember where I watched it. It was a couple years ago.
Okay.
I know I've seen them on something, and it had to be
watched it on
Hulu or Netflix. So.
Well, I have both of those, and I do not have normal TV, so I'll have to check it out.
You don't have cable anymore.
Right.
I tried to recall the title of my high fantasy guilty pleasure, but I've apparently suppressed that information from myself, so I couldn't relocate it for myself What I could recommend is if you want some high fantasy that gets really gritty and maybe almost too realistic, there's a series by Glenn Cook called The Black Company. They are massive novels.
Oh, so good.
They're phenomenally written, but they are basically, what if you took an adventuring company and you wrote it as if they were in the real world dealing with like death and misfortune at every turn, etc. And like even magic from their perspective, because they're all mercenaries, is very foreign and terrifying.
There's an old like Nintendo era RPG kind of like that called Darklands, and it takes place in like medieval Germany, and there's no magic or anything to it. You have to heal yourself with potions and stuff. So when you do run into monsters, it's just like, this is the most terrifying thing that I could even conceive of. And it's killed me in one hit. It's a really deadly game.
Oh my gosh.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I've already talked at length about my guilty pleasure of 1632, but if I had to add anything else, I would say any Anne Rice novel after The Vampire Lestat. Like at that point, it just all sort of like dissolves into just a mess of melodrama and vampires.
Oh my goodness! I watched Queen of the Damned.
That was your first, second, and third mistake.
Have you? Please tell me you've seen it.
Of course I've seen it.
So bad. It's like peak 80s bad.
Yeah, but it was made in like 2001 or something.
No.
Yeah.
So bad.
Yeah, like I'll look it up. But yeah, but the thing is, like, Interview with a Vampire is so good. Vampire Lestat is so good. And then you get to Queen of the Damned, you're like, okay, Lestat's a rock star, okay. And then the Body Thief, and you're like, what the hell is this? And then then you get to Vampire Armand, and it just goes nuts after that. Like, I love the mythos of all those vampires, but like Anne Rice just went crazy after a certain point. She couldn't tell a good story anymore. But that being said, I am very excited for the Anne Rice Vampires television series that's supposed to be coming out in a couple of years.
Oh, I haven't heard of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's going to be on Amazon Prime, actually. And I think her son is like executive producing it, because she had that period where she stopped writing about vampires and only wrote about Jesus, and now she's back to writing about vampires.
Interesting turn.
Yeah.
Our Anne Rice expert here.
I really loved the Interview with a Vampire, the movie with Brad Pitt, and that got me into the books, and I love the books, but as I said, they're terrible. They're terrible after a certain point.
I like both the book and the movie for Interview with Vampires.
Mm-hmm.
Good.
Yeah, the movie just made a lot of really good, like, stylistic choices. Oh, Queen of the Damned was 2002, actually.
Why
Yeah.
am I thinking 80s?
Because it has that kind of feel to it.
Is it set in the 80s?
Maybe? It might be set in the 80s, because that would be contemporaneous with when the book was published.
You never know. It was such a thing.
Yeah. Do we want to bring it back to books rather than vampire movies before we end? Josh?
I was going to go ahead and say that if you want to participate in conversations such as these with fellow nerds, up to and including a lot of the people in chat right now, I'm dropping the link to the Discord in chat right now. So that's available. You can find Brandon and I on our weekly Thursdays podcast, Quid Pro Roll, which is itself in a high fantasy setting where metallic dragons have disappeared and our party is on a race against time, by which I mean the prophecy was given to us, and the woman who gave it to us, who is the guide NPC, keeps telling us that we're being too slow as we run about and create havoc and shenanigans around this glorious world that the DM has created for us.
Also, I play a wrestler.
That's part of why there's so much chaos. You can find us there. You can find us on the Discord. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We've got a Patreon if you're looking to support us continuing to do beautiful things like this. Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all of those are going to be / Goblins Growlers or Goblins and Growlers. Sometimes we got one and sometimes we got the other. So
Yeah.
no problem. Yeah.
Lauren, if you want to hype your Instagram for a minute or two.
Please hype your Instagram.
Follow me on Instagram at Feminist Reading List. I post like book reviews of whatever I'm reading at the time. Lots of sci-fi, fantasy, and romance with the focus on like queer and like female-led stories. Yeah.
If you've been wondering previously why Lauren has available to her so many books about lesbian necromancers, now you know.
Next month, we find out she is a lesbian necromancer.
So are we reading Gideon the Ninth? Is that the sort of...
That sounds like the plan to me.
I cannot think of a better option than reading this story about lesbian necromancers.
Yeah.
I have actually already purchased it.
I'm very excited. There's a lot of pressure being the one with the book recommendation.
Well,
I'm excited. You sold me. I'm sold.
Yeah, that's the thing. You're a good salesperson. You made a great sale on this. So as long as you stand behind the product you're selling, we're going to be fine.
And I think every last one of us has read bad fantasy novels, so I don't think you need to worry about us being like, Lauren, what is this? What did you recommend?
I'm glad the bar's down here.
Yeah, so everybody who wants to, we will be back, I think May 18th is when we scheduled the next one of these. That's what it says on the Facebook event. Yeah, if you're on Facebook, follow the Facebook event, which you can find on Goblins and Growlers. And we will be back, and we will have a fulsome discussion about this crazy book that sounds actually really good now that we've sat and talked about it for a little bit, that I'm super looking forward to reading. But
if you read the book as well, you can be part of that discussion on Twitch in chat.
Yeah, thanks everybody for bearing with us on this. We just thought this would be a fun thing to try. We're just sort of figuring it out a little bit. But we'll make this video available later for people, and we'll couple it with a blog post with some stuff about the books everybody talked about. All right.
Good to me.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for taking time out of your Monday evening, both to be a part of this and to view it and to participate in chat.